The desert gave no shade and no mercy. The woman moved like a ghost through the canyon pass, skin wind-burnt, barefoot, the hem of her tattered wedding dress dragging through dust and sagebrush. A linen sheet clung to her chest, tied over. One shoulder, where a baby stirred weakly, its cries more breath than voice now. The wind tugged at her shawl like greedy fingers, threatening to strip away what little she had left. Her name was Clara May, but no one had spoken it in days. Not since Jonas left them stranded with a broken wagon wheel, a dry canteen, and a promise to return. He never had. The sun had blistered her lips. Her saws were split and raw, and her fingers trembled around the baby's narrow ribs, as if she could hold his breath, inside him by will alone. Then she saw it, the ranch. A lonely house slumped against the dying light, its roofline crooked, its porch warped. A single lamp glowed behind a torn curtain. Chickens scratched at the yard, and somewhere behind it all, the soft echo of a hammer striking metal rang out once, and again. Clara didn't hope for salvation. She only needed stillness, shade, ground that wouldn't take her baby from her dot as she staggered toward the fence. A figure moved on the porch. Tall, broad-shouldered, a rifle leaned against the doorframe. He watched her come, unmoving. A man carved from the very rock behind his house, Clara, stopped a few paces from the porch. She couldn't speak. Her throat was cracked raw. Her knees buckled. He didn't ask her name, didn't demand a reason. He turned slowly, stepped off the porch, and crossed the yard. When he reached the barn, he unlatched the door and pulled it open wide. Clara followed without question, one hand tightening on the child. Inside, it was dry. Hay scattered across the ground. The air smelled of horses, wood, and oil. The man lit a lantern, hung it from a hook, and left. Minutes later, he returned with a tin cup, steam curling into the cool air. He set it beside her without a word and turned back into the night. Only then did Clara collapse to her knees. The baby stirred and gave a rasping little cry. She unwrapped the linen, checked his fevered skin, and tucked his head beneath her chin. Her whole body shook as she knelt in the straw, holding him. The coffee sat untouched outside. The wind whistled low across the plains like a mournful song. Coyotes answered it from the hills, their calls long and thin. Somewhere to the south, the sky flickered with dry lightning. But no rain came. Man didn't return that night. Clara watched the lantern flicker and dim, rocking slightly in the breeze from the warped barn boards. She nestled the baby beneath a horse blanket she'd found in the corner, pressing her face into the warm wool. Her legs had stopped bleeding hours ago. Her voice had gone with them. She was too tired to pray. The baby coughed again, then fell quiet, and still the barn held. Sometime before dawn, she stirred to the sound of hoofsteps. Not near, distant, measured, the rhythm of a man walking the perimeter of his land, protecting what little he claimed. He didn't look into the barn, just passed by like a ghost with a limp. His shadow moved across the slats, then disappeared. She didn't sleep. Again, not truly dot in the fragile gray just before dawn, Clara sat up, the child clinging to her chest. Her eyes stung from salt and smoke and grief. So much grief. Her gaze caught the tin cup. Still warm Dot, she brought it to her lips and drank. Bitter, strong, but it was something. The man's presence lingered. Not in the barn itself, but in the way the roof didn't leak, in the blanket folded just within reach, in the space left undisturbed for her to breathe. She didn't know his name. He hadn't asked hers. That was fine. She wasn't looking for kindness. She was only trying to stay alive. But the strangest thing, something inside her recognized him. Not his face, not his hands, but the shape of his grief, Grief had a scent, a silence, a way it left. You standing at a distance from the world, even when someone was standing right in front of you. And this man carried that silence like a second skin. She had escaped death in the desert, but now it seemed she had stepped into something even more enduring, a place where sorrow walked on two legs, and still opened the barn door. Morning came on the back of hoofbeats and hammer strikes. Clara blinked awake, the baby still curled against her chest, sweat beading beneath the blanket wrapped around them both. Pale light poured in through the slats, thick with dust, turning the inside of the barn a faded gold. The man, the rancher, moved like he'd already been awake for hours. She saw him through the wooden cracks, bent beside a fence post with a hammer in hand. Each strike was steady, measured, the rhythm of someone who knew how to lose time inside simple things. The baby fussed. Clara shifted, her arms aching as she sat upright, rocking gently until he quieted. His eyes were clearer now, his cheeks flushed but no longer gray. She pressed her lips to his temple, still warm but alive. The sound of the hammer fell away, replaced by a soft creak at the barn door. The man stood just outside it. He didn't step inside. He held out a cloth bundle in one calloused hand. Bread, rough, coarse, broken into two halves. She stared for a beat too long before reaching for it. No words passed between them. He nodded once and walked back across the yard. Limping slightly, Clara tore off a piece of bread and chewed slowly, the rough crust scraping her throat, reminding her how empty she was. She gave the softer inside to the baby, dipped in a bit of water from the bucket near the stall. She didn't say thank you. She didn't know how anymore. That afternoon, when the sun had settled just past its highest point, Clara walked the edge of the corral behind the barn. She found a pail. A goat. She figured out the rest. The animal was calm beneath her hands, and the milk came easy. The man watched once from a distance, then nodded again and returned to his work. A rhythm took root, quietly, without plan. She rose early, cleaned what she used, folded her blanket when she left it, washed the baby in the metal trough once the sun warmed it enough. She spoke little. He never tried to speak more, but things appeared. A second blanket, a pair of boots beside the barn door, a size too big, a bar of lye soap in a tin, all left without announcement. She didn't ask why. He didn't explain. Inside the barn, past the old saddle racks and dust-covered crates, she found a wooden box pushed beneath a low bench. She opened it on impulse, then wished she hadn't. A boy's shirt rested on top, thin cotton with small patches sewn in by hand, each one different in shape and thread. Beneath it lay a wooden horse, the kind carved by a man who worked in. Silence and sanded with care. Its tail was chipped, its legs worn smooth. At the bottom of the box, folded carefully as if untouched by time, was a braid of golden hair tied with pale ribbon. Tucked beneath it, a hand-carved cross. She closed the lid softly and set it back where it had been. Outside, the wind shifted, bringing cooler air down from the northern hills. The kind that signaled summer's breath was shortening. Clara gathered the baby in her arms and leaned against a stack of hay, staring out the open door. He was sleeping better now. His color had returned. His cough had softened. He smiled in his sleep, and it made her ache. She thought of Jonas then, his voice, honey-slicked and fast-talking. The way he'd reached for her wrist instead of her hand. How he'd smiled when he left, like it was nothing to leave a woman, and child in the middle of nowhere with a busted axle and half a canteen. "I'll fetch help," he'd said. "Won't take long." Then he'd kissed the baby's forehead and turned toward the ridge. She'd waited until sundown. Then until midnight. Then until the buzzards circled the ridge and the wagon wheel gave out completely. She should have known. She'd been the second bride anyway. Her husband, Caleb, had died from fever only months into the marriage. Jonas had stepped in like a man, doing his duty, though he'd never stopped calling her by the wrong name. She didn't cry about it now. There was no sense. The rancher returned to the porch as the sun lowered, rocking gently in a chair that groaned beneath his weight. He didn't look at her. She didn't look at him, but she noticed that his eyes always scanned the horizon, like a man waiting for something to return, or to stay gone. That night, after the baby slept and the barn turned silver with moonlight, Clara sat by the open door and stared at the stars. She thought about the braid, the cross, the child's shirt with stitches done in love. Grief had a scent. She recognized it now. It lived in this place, in the hush of footfalls, in the careful way he closed the barn door, in the space between their words. She was not the only one who had lost someone. She was not the only ghost under this roof. The wind began to shift in the late afternoon, not gently, but like a sudden exhale across the land. Trees bent low near the creek bed. Dust lifted in long, twisting trails, and the sky darkened at the edges like bruised skin. Clara paused. At the trough, the washcloth in her hand still dripping, and looked toward the western ridge. Clouds hung there like a threat. She felt it in her ribs first, not fear exactly, but memory. The kind that walked beside you, breathing softly, waiting for the right moment to remind you what it had taken Dot by the time the first crack of thunder rolled over the hills. Wes had already started gathering the animals. She saw him from the barn window, his limp more pronounced as he tugged a stubborn mare by the halter toward the stable. His shirt was soaked through before the rain even hit hard, but he didn't rush. He moved like a man who knew storms, who had once waited. Out worse, Clara wrapped Micah in the thickest wool blanket she could find and crouched in the corner of the barn. The baby whimpered, his tiny fists tightening in her dress. Then the rain came, sudden and furious, hammering the tin roof like bullets. The sound swallowed everything. Wind moaned through the beams. The lantern flickered on its hook, throwing long shadows that danced like ghosts across the hay. She held her son tight, rocked him gently, and closed her eyes. She didn't know what she was remembering, only that her bones felt cold, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Her body remembered fear more than her mind did. Then came the knock, not a soft one. Not West. Three sharp raps against the barn door, like someone reminding the dead they weren't forgotten. Clara's body froze. The baby stirred in her arms. Another knock. Then a voice, low and drawn out like oil, sliding across water. Well now, ain't this a cozy little setup? She stood slowly, her back against the far wall. A baby clutched against her chest. The door creaked open, and the man stepped inside, tall, thin, face lined like cracked leather. A soaked hat sat crooked on his head, and his coat was stained with trail dust and tobacco. He smiled in a way that showed no kindness. Tucker Branch, he said, tipping his hat as if she'd asked. Ride for the sheriff, when it suits me. His eyes slid over the barn, then stopped on the baby. His grin widened. Well, I'll be. Thought they were lying. Woman wandering out here with a brat and no name. Desert trash, they called. You. Clara didn't speak. She couldn't. Her mouth was too dry. Her spine pressed into the beam behind her. Tucker stepped further in, boots crunching hay beneath him. You know, he said, low and slow, a woman like you don't last long out here, especially not with a mouth that don't talk and a kid that don't shut up. He took one more step toward her, then stopped. The sound came behind him, slow, deliberate footsteps squelching through wet earth. And then, behind his shadow, another formed, Westdot the rancher stood in the open doorway, soaked to the bone. Water dripped from the brim of his hat. His eyes didn't blink. A rifle lay across his arms, casual as a broom, but there was nothing casual in the way his finger hovered near the trigger. Tucker turned, that grin faltering. "Now, Wes," he said, holding up both hands. "Didn't mean no harm. Just checking in, looking after folks." Wes didn't speak. Tucker waited. The silence stretched. Then Wes stepped forward, just one step. Enough to make Tucker flinch. Without another word, Tucker backed out the barn, slipping once in the mud. Before he mounted his horse, he turned and spat in the dirt near Clara's bare feet, just inches from the child. Then he rode off into the storm. Wes didn't follow him. He stepped inside instead, scanned Clara, and then, without meeting her eyes, set the rifle on a hook near the saddle tack. Rain ran in rivers down his jacket. He turned to go, but paused, reached into his coat, pulled out a small canned peaches, stamped with a rusted label, and set it gently on the hay bale beside her bedroll. Then he left, closing the barn door behind him. Clara stood there for a long time after, her heart thudding. Micah stirred, then settled again. The sound of rain softened to a whisper. The wind calmed. The lantern dimmed. She sat down slowly, placed the peaches beside her, but didn't open them. Not for hours. When she did, she ate only half. The other half she fed to her son with her fingers. Dawn came pale and wet. The storm had passed, but the scent of it clung to the air, sharp and wild, like turned earth and cedar bark. Clara opened the barn door just enough to feel the breeze on her face. The yard was quiet. Mud pooled between the troughs. A crow circled low. She heard the steps before she saw him. Wes entered the barn with a lantern in one hand, its glass streaked with ash. He didn't look at her, didn't look at the child. He just hung the lantern back on its hook, wiped his hands on a cloth, and walked out again. But in the way he moved, slow, steady, unchanged, she felt something shift. The world didn't want her, but this place, this man, he hadn't turned her away. Not yet. The days grew cooler. The wind shifted, brushing in from the north now, stirring the edge of the shawl around Clara's shoulders as she stood outside the barn. Micah was wrapped against her chest, tucked tight, his breath warm on her collarbone. She watched Wes work the fence line, quiet, methodical, never rushing. The man handled wood the way a mother handled cloth, knowing where it would give, where it might split. He never looked up, but she could feel him glancing her way when he thought she wasn't watching. That afternoon, he did something new. Without a word, he took the old rocking chair from inside his porch and dragged it near the doorway, facing out toward the hills. He nodded toward it, not quite an invitation, not quite a command, then disappeared into the barn to fetch. Feed. Clara hesitated. Then she stepped onto the porch, sat down slowly, and let the creaking motion of the rocker settle her bones. Micah made a soft cooing sound. Then he laughed, a clear, gurgling laugh that surprised even Clara. She looked down, startled. The baby's eyes were bright, his hands waving in the air. From behind the screen door, Wes stood motionless, one hand resting on the wooden frame. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened in a way that didn't need to. That night, Clara found a new object near her bedroll, a handmade cradle. Rough pine, sanded at the corners, nailed with uneven care, but built to hold weight. It wasn't polished. It wasn't elegant, but it had been made for her, for Micah, for staying. She ran her fingers over the edge, tracing the grain, and sat beside it and pulled her baby close. She buried her face in his hair and let herself cry without sound. Just a few slow tears that stained the collar of his blanket. They ate together, That night, in silence, seated on either side of the hearth in the main house, Clara didn't step beyond the threshold until Wes moved aside and held the door open. Inside, the house smelled like old wood, black coffee, and dust. A fire snapped in the stone hearth, casting long shadows on the floor. He handed her a tin mug. She sipped, coughed at the strength of the brew, then nodded. The food was simple, jerky, bread, boiled potatoes, but warm. She didn't thank him, and he didn't expect her to. Between them hung unspoken stories. Hers was named Jonas. His was buried beneath the cottonwoods she'd seen beyond the pasture, a place where no cattle wandered, where the grass was trimmed by hand, where a small iron cross caught the sun. She didn't ask. He didn't tell. She only said one thing that night, after Micah had fallen asleep on a folded quilt near the hearth. "I won't go back." He didn't reply. He only stoked the fire, his face half-lit in amber glow. The next morning she rose early, found the porch already swept clean. A tin basin sat near the railing with warm water, steam still rising. She washed quickly and noticed something tucked beneath the old lantern. A Bible, leather-bound, worn at the spine. She opened it on instinct. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, a child's drawing. A boy, a horse, a cabin. Crude lines and crooked stars. In a child's blocky handwriting, the name Eli Calder was scrawled across the bottom. Her hand stilled. She closed the book softly, pressed it to her lap, and sat in the rocker as the sky turned pale. Wes walked past with 2 feed buckets, his boots crunching gravel. She didn't look at him. He didn't say a word. But she understood something then. The man who had opened the barn door was not doing it out of mercy alone. He was someone who knew what it meant to lose a child. Later that day, she found him in the shed behind the barn, sanding a new piece of wood. She didn't interrupt. She stood for a long moment, then said, "You built that cradle by hand." He didn't look up. Wasn't much else to do yesterday. She hesitated. "Thank you." He nodded once. "It'll hold." "Might squeak some. Needs settling." She smiled at that. Not wide, not bright, but real. Micah's laugh came again. That evening, this time louder, echoing off the porch beams. Clara let him rock in the cradle while she folded sheets. Wes stood by the doorway, one hand resting on the post. He watched with the stillness of someone afraid to breathe too hard. She didn't ask him to stay. He didn't ask her to leave. The rifle above his hearth remained untouched. But she could feel the weight of its presence in the house, like something that had been fired in anger once, then never again. Wes moved like a man who carried both guilt and grace in equal measure. And Clara, for the first time since the desert, felt the ache in her chest soften. Love wasn't gone. It was just hiding, in wood smoke, in silence, in rocking chairs and leftover pine, and in the sound of a baby's laughter. The heat came early that morning, dry and sharp, riding in on the backs of flies and rising dust. Clara felt it before the sun had cleared the ridge. A heaviness in the air, a restlessness in the animals. Even Micah stirred uneasily, whining in his sleep. She carried him close as she moved through her morning chores, trying to pretend the sweat on her palms was from work, not worry. Something was shifting. She felt it in her teeth. Wes was sharpening tools by the shed when they came. 3 riders, moving fast across the dry plain, their horses kicking up long trails behind them. At the front, slouched in a too familiar saddle, rode Jonas. Clara froze. Even from a distance, she could see the glint of his belt buckle, the way his hat tilted. Too far back, exposing a face always too smug to be trusted. He rode with the laziness of someone who believed the world owed him soft landings. He pulled up just shy of the gate. His companions didn't dismount. They flanked him, one tall, one broad, both with their coats pinned back enough to show. The guns at their hips. Jonas grinned. "Well, look what the storm blew in," he called, tipping his hat toward Wes first, then turning his eyes on Clara. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your host?" Wes didn't move from where he stood. Jonas went on. "That's my brother's widow, you know. And that child's a blood name, too." They went and wandered, off while I was setting things right. Clara held Micah tighter. Her feet wouldn't move. "She stole from me," Jonas continued, louder now. "Wagon, gold coins, tools, even a Bible with my name in it. Reckon the sheriff call that a felony." He looked back at his men, who chuckled low and mean. "She's not yours," Clara said, her voice small but shaking. "You left us. You walked away." Jonas raised his brows. "And here I am, back again. Don't that count for something?" Wes stepped forward, not fast, not threatening, but deliberate. He crossed the yard and stopped a few paces from Jonas, the sun cutting across his shoulders, casting a long shadow behind him. In his hands, he held the rifle. It hung low, barrel aimed down, but his fingers curled with memory. Jonas narrowed his eyes. "Now listen, fella, I ain't looking for a fight." Wes didn't answer. "I got papers, witnesses. You harboring stolen goods could land you in a ditch." Still no reply. "Hell, she ain't even yours," Jonas snapped. "You got no call." The shot cracked like dry bone splitting open. The bullet hit the dirt not 2 inches from Jonas' left boot, kicking up a burst of dust. The silence afterward stretched into something primal. Even the horses stilled. Wes raised his head, eyes locked on Jonas, the rifle still in his hands. Jonas's face paled beneath the tan. "You out of your mind?" Wes said nothing, but the line had been drawn, clean as a knife through paper. Other 2 men shifted in their saddles, uncertain now. One reached for his reins. The tall one spat into the dirt and muttered, "Ain't worth it, Jonas." Jonas held Wes's gaze another long second, and clicked his tongue and turned his. "Horse. You just bought trouble, friend." He didn't look at Clara as he rode off, but the way he clenched the reins said enough. The riders disappeared over the ridge. Dust swallowed their trail. Clara stood in the shade of the porch, her knees barely. Holding her, Micah whimpered, sensing her fear. She kissed his forehead and sat slowly on the steps. Wes returned the rifle to its place beside the door and disappeared inside. She didn't follow, but when night fell and the lanterns were lit, Wes stepped onto the porch with something in his hands. A tin box. The corners dented, the lid rusted. In one spot, he handed it to her without a word. She opened it slowly, the hinges creaking. Inside lay a folded wedding dress, aged ivory, simple but beautiful in its hand-stitched seams. Beside it, a pair of soft leather boots, polished but worn in the heels. Clara touched the fabric with trembling fingers. "Why are you giving me this?" Wes sat beside her, his eyes on the horizon. "If you leave," he said softly, "you can wear these." She turned to look at him. "And if I stay?" He didn't smile, just stared out at the stars beginning to blink through the dusk. "If you stay," he said, "you'll need stronger ones." She looked down at the boots again, then closed the box. Her hand found his, rough and calloused and still scarred along the knuckles. She didn't squeeze, just held it there, long enough for him to feel the answer she wasn't sure how to say. Some men write promises in letters, some speak them out loud, and some leave a cradle, a rifle, and a wedding dress, and let you choose which one you belong to. The sheriff came at dawn. Clara saw him first from the porch, his horse slow along the ridge, his deputy trailing behind like a tired shadow. They didn't gallop, didn't raise dust. Just approached steady, like men who'd been told not to rush where the wind wasn't welcome. Wes met them at the gate. No rifle. No words. The sheriff tipped his hat, glanced toward the barn, and then toward the edge of the pasture, where a man had been left for someone else to find Jonas. He was there, just beyond the cottonwoods, hands tied behind the same fence post he'd once leaned on like he owned it. His lip was split, one eye swollen shut. His boots were gone. The sheriff looked him over, sighed, and turned back to Wes. "Well," he said, "looks like the bastard slipped off his saddle and found justice in the weeds." Wes didn't respond. The deputy pulled a face. "What do?" "We do with him?" The sheriff spat in the dirt. "Untie him. Point him east. If he comes back, bury him in it." Then, without another word, he rode toward the house. Clara stood quietly, Micah on her hip. The sheriff nodded to her, not out of duty, but like a man acknowledging a truth long overdue. "Ma'am," he said simply. She dipped her chin. "Sir?" He looked to the cradle on the porch, where the wedding dress still sat folded in the corner, untouched. Then to Wes, who now leaned against the post, hat low, saying nothing. The sheriff smiled faintly. "Heard this place wasn't meant for meddling. Seems that's true enough." He tipped his hat again. "You all take care now." They rode. Out the same way they came. No report filed. No questions asked. Just the kind of justice the land believed in. Quiet, fast, and final. Days passed like they had before, only softer now. Wes sanded wood in the shade, whittling a shape slowly. A small horse, carved from desert pine, its legs rounded smooth, its tail curled just slightly. Clara watched from the rocker, Micah babbling softly at her feet, chewing on a button she'd stitched onto his blanket. She began tending the garden. It had gone wild, choked with weeds and brittle vines. She cut back what she could, planting rosemary, onions, a line of desert beans she found in the shed. Her hands blistered. Her back ached. But she worked with the quiet satisfaction of a woman putting down roots. The cradle remained near the door, still lined with quilts. The wedding dress stayed folded, untouched, not out of fear, but reverence. Some things didn't need to be worn to be real. One afternoon, the old dog, Wes's mutt, who had followed him like a shadow since Clara arrived, lay down near the cottonwoods and didn't get up. Wes buried him beside the first grave. The one with the iron cross and the name carved in a boy's hand, Eli. Clara, stood beside him as he lowered the wrapped body into the earth. She brought with her a small potted desert rose, one she'd stolen from the overgrowth by the fence, and pressed it into the soil. Wes watched her with his hat in hand, eyes unreadable. She didn't speak until the wind carried dust over. The hill. Then she said it. His name, Wes. Just that. And it was enough. That evening, the sky turned violet, and the sun spilled gold over the hills like paint. Clara brushed Micah's hair, wrapped him to her back with the shawl she hadn't worn since the day she arrived, and stepped outside. Wes was waiting by the horses, one saddled for her, the other for him. He didn't ask where they were going. She didn't ask why he'd come along. They rode side by side, slow at first, through the edge of the valley. Dust kicked beneath their heels. Micah slept against her spine. The town came into view like a memory, half forgotten, still wary. People watched as they passed, but not with pity, not with scorn, only with the silence of people who understood what it took to come back from where you weren't supposed to survive. They didn't say they were a family. They didn't need to. Love wasn't something they found. It was something they rebuilt, from firelight and broken tools, from scars and silence, from wedding dresses folded carefully in cradles, and from strangers who stayed when everyone else walked away.